Welcome back. Questions are understandably being asked by donor countries about how the $25 billion they've donated since 2001 has been used. Understandably, because Afghanistan is considered one of the most corrupt countries in the world. According to Transparency International, it is the 9th most corrupt country out of the 180 it surveys. And of the $25 billion donated in the last 7 years, aid agencies say only $15 billion has been spent. That's because 70% of international donations aren't channeled through the government, meaning the state has very little control over most of its pledged money. There's also a recent survey by an independent watchdog which found for every $100 given, only $20 actually reaches the Afghans intended. But on the other hand, international donors have fallen behind in paying what they've already pledged. And because Afghanistan is being reconstructed by international contractors, much of the money goes straight back to donor countries in the form of salaries and profits. Well, joining us again are our guests in Paris, Daoud Sultanzoy, in London, Paul Burton, and also in Paris, Yama Torabi. Gentlemen, thanks for staying with us. I'm going to go back to Yama Torabi in Paris. We've heard this issue of corruption come up in the first half of the program. Let's look at it in some depth here. Afghanistan has such a low rating, I guess, when it comes to dealing with corruption. In your view, is it that the problem is too big for the government to deal with, or that they're just simply not doing enough in the first place?
Well, I think it's kind of a both, because we started from the very low level in 2002, so there was no institutions, no rules. So then the corruption has become a big issue. But on the other part, if you look at what has happened actually over the last the first years of reconstruction in Afghanistan, donors were not really interested and saw this as an obstacle, and the Afghan government was not also interested in dealing the issue of corruption with more serious consideration. So it has become a huge problem now. Although we spoke with many of these stakeholders when we started working on the issue, it was quite difficult to get their attention on this. So it is both a question of capacity, institutional capacity, but also a question of will and political will, both from donors and from the Afghan state.
Paul Burton in London, Yama Torabi there was just talking about the will of these nations, and that is very important because they seem to be saying now effectively, look, we'll give you the money, but you've really got to sort this corruption out before we're going to hand that money over to you. Do you think the Afghan government can rise to that challenge, I guess is the word?
Well, I think the introduction of benchmarks for the dispersal of aid is very important, but it's a gross oversimplification, I think, to lay the blame entirely upon the door of the Afghan government, which, as our previous speaker so rightly said, has come from a tremendously low base, 25 years of war in various forms. I think we also have to look very carefully at the way in which international governments disperse their aid, and the majority of aid spent thus far has simply circumvented the majority of government institutions at a central and a provincial level. So, for example, USAID is the primary donor and spender of money on roads, and that goes straight to the local project to build the road. So we can't really lay the blame for this entirely at Kabul's door.
Okay, so what needs to change then? Where does the change need to come from? If the government needs to do its part, obviously, where does the other change have to come from?
Well, again, I think the change has to come with the international community working in far closer tandem with the Afghan government and paying more attention to such core issues of rule of law and judicial development, etc. It's no longer good enough to simply make pledges without having guarantees alongside other core state development. And I think now there has to be a realisation that this needs to be a core issue of focus now for all parties concerned.
Daoud Sultanzoy in Paris, there is a statistic out there which says 70% of donations which come to Afghanistan don't actually go through the government. Can the government really account for what happens to that? I mean, it's a fairly large amount of money, obviously. Where's it going? What's happening to it?
Well, of course, some of it is wasted in corruption, both local corruption and international corruption. Some of it is wasted in waste, basically, itself.
Sorry, I'm just going to stop you. Sorry, can you give me some
duplication.
specifics of corruption?
Yeah.
Because this was a word that all four of us keep using quite easily. Can you give me some
Yes.
specifics from your government point of view of what corruption means?
Well, corruption is not just when people, common wisdom would say just bribery, but there are different forms of corruption in a government or in a state. For example, nepotism. For example, impunity. For example, lack of rule of law, not being able to go through procedural processes, that bidding processes, that projects have to be bidded in terms of allocation of funds for projects. For example, lack of leadership in order to have a strategy to spend the money in time and on time and deliver it to the people. The bottom line is the recipient or the people of Afghanistan, and we have to have a leadership. We can point fingers to everybody, but first of all, as Afghans, as a state, we have to point our fingers to ourselves, and we have to have the ability to guide the donor countries. We have to have the capability to lead the donor countries to the directions that the people of Afghanistan are really in need of.
Okay, then, so within the country,
good leadership would have done this.
Within the country, though, what would you see done? You talk a lot about leadership. I want to raise the idea also of the regional governments. Could they play a bigger role in this? If you're saying that the problem is a top-down thing where the leadership at the top is not working, what about the regional governments out there with the people?
The regional governments also are installed or appointed mostly by the central government, or at least with the acquiescence of the central government, and the vetting process and the assignment process is not in place right now. The civil service reform did not go through its intended course. The anti-corruption reform did not go through its intended course. So appointment of governors should be a very strict appointment. It should meet certain criteria that the people of Afghanistan require. They need professionalism. They need people who know what they want to know, what their job is. And corruption should be completely something that is punishable. You know, the rule of law has to take care of corruption. If there's rule of law, then we don't have to talk about corruption. It will take care of itself. But also the international community also have to be held accountable, because the amount of waste, the amount of duplication, the amount of the lack of coordination, this is also contributing to a lot of abuse and misuse of funds. And after all the countries who are committing funds, their taxpayers are involved in this, and we have to be accountable to all those people.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Dawood Sultanzoy in Paris, Paul Burton in London, and Yamut Turabi in Paris as well. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, our viewer, for joining us here on Inside Story. Goodbye for now.